It's just common sense.
Back on MorningLine, our final segment this morning with Bess Joslyn Roth. She's an executive director there over at the Safe Tennessee Project. And talking about gun safety and policies, your organization, again, as we say when we come back from each break, is not advocating getting rid of the Second Amendment. You support gun rights, but you're looking at ways to try to make things safer. And you know, not everyone agrees on if there's a good way to do that or what's the best way to do that, but they have their take. Let's go to Chris. Hi, Chris. Are you there, Chris? Hi, Chris. Good morning. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing okay. Let me ask you just one simple question.
Yeah.
What is the term reasonable supposed to mean to me? That's very vague.
Reasonable. You mean like in terms of what reasonable steps can be made to make guns safer?
Yes, and common sense and gun safety. These are all key phrases, but they're very vague. They really don't say anything. It's just like, fair tax. Fair tax to who?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. So his point, we use those words, but I think that you have given some specific suggestions, and there's some other policies that we support. Things that you believe are reasonable are, as you said, expanding background checks to cover all guns. You know, among other things, you're talking about maybe strengthening some of the domestic violence laws, preventing those on terrorist watch lists from being legally able to purchase firearms. I mean, those are more specific, and I guess those are some definitions of what you would call reasonable. Yeah,
I mean, I would say to me, reasonable or common sense would mean, you know, particular policies that do not in any way prevent a law-abiding gun owner who is legally allowed to have a gun from being able to purchase a gun and keep a gun in their home. You know, I think to me that sounds reasonable. I mean, you know, if you want to have a gun and you're allowed to have one, I don't have a problem with that. The policies that we're advocating are steps that can be taken to try and prevent guns from being in the wrong hands.
Okay. Let's go next to Tony. Hi, Tony.
Good morning, Nick.
Good morning, sir.
I got a parable I want to tell you, and this is true. Back in '99, I was working for the Department of Corrections, and was directed to transport about 25 to 30 inmates to East Tennessee, and we stopped at Cookwood to gas the bus up. So I went inside to get change after I got relief, give me something to drink, a Coke. The highway patrol man, he refused to give me change, and he jumped up behind his desk. I snapped his gun behind the desk. So we was at a standstill like a drawdown. I just backed out the door and told him, if you want to, we have more weapons than that on the bus. We could wipe this whole building out.
Well, why was he doing that? What do you think, you were in there robbing the place or something?
I was in a clear uniform, clear identification.
Oh, so he thought you were maybe what?
He was a racist.
Oh, and,
okay. So I backed out the door with my gun and snapped. It could have been a drawdown. Went back to the bus, completely gassed up, and we left. I never said anything about it, never told my children or family about this. The supervisor was aware of this. She's still working today at the Department of Corrections.
So
she was over us. Nothing was ever done. So
your point, though, is that was a close call, huh?
My point is, you think people, young men and blacks, should be trusting the police and the highway patrol who's transporting this governor around who don't care about the highway? Do you think people, minorities, should be trusting law enforcement if they doing this to their own? I don't think so.
Okay, and again, I don't know, that's a little off point in terms of guns. Yeah, listen, I appreciate it, Tony, but it does show, you know, the two of them in there with a, you know, a standoff, and lucky cooler heads prevailed. Let's go to Mark. Hi, Mark. Mark, what's on your mind?
Good morning, Nick.
Good morning.
I got a question.
Yeah.
What about these gun dealers that don't do background checks and they sell guns to a convicted felony? Can the authority go after them?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've seen it before. You know, for instance, if we can find out where this individual, Tim Batts, who shot his daughter on Monday, got that gun from, the person who sold it to him, I think, could also be held accountable.
Well, I mean, possibly, but since we don't require background checks, there's no way for. If I'm a gun seller, there's no way for me to know whether or not you're a convicted felon if I'm selling you the gun.
That's true. So, that's true. So maybe that would be his argument. I had no way of knowing.
Right.
You know, and that's a fair question. I don't know if that's something that could be addressed in the law. But it would be if you require those checks.
Right.
And that's your point.
Right.
Let's go to Grady. Hi, Grady.
Good morning, Nick.
Good morning, Grady.
You know, I was always taught to be sure what your target was when you pulled the trigger. You know, and these people with guns, and they're loaded, and they're just waiting to hear a noise so they can pull the trigger. They don't care what the target is. They got to be to blame for this. And I've told them for years that if a person dropped a gun in a restaurant and it went off, endangered my family, I'd make them eat the gun. And I'll hang up and listen to your comments.
Well, that's the thing. The tragedy of it all is these folks who maybe are like he just described, that shoot before they really know what they're doing. They end up killing a loved one. And
right.
Imagine the, you know, whatever you think about this individual, Tim Batts, as he sits in jail right now and charged with, you know, a serious crime and $1 million bond. I guarantee you, he is devastated that he shot his daughter. Now, I don't know who he thought was coming after him or what the problem was there and why he was on so edge, but he is devastated. And, you know, is that worth it? My gosh, you better get the proper training and know what you're doing if you're going to have a gun there. Right.
Well, I mean, exactly. You know, and that also, to me, would pertain to some degree in terms of if you're going to have a gun in your home and if there are children present, that it's absolutely imperative to store the gun safely. You know, we have a real problem in our state, sadly, with adult gun owners leaving loaded guns accessible to children, and then a child picks up the gun and fires it and injures or kills themselves, or oftentimes a sibling or a friend. And you know, you think about the lives that are affected when something like that happens. And you know, you just have to you know, make a choice if you want to take that risk of having the gun in your home, which if you want to, that's completely fine, but if you're going to do that, you just have to be responsible with it. You have to be responsible about how it's stored so that your children are not picking it up, and you have to be responsible about not pulling the trigger unless you're absolutely sure of what or who you're shooting at.
Well, now, and with regard to that and the laws that can change, and we talked about this before the show, Michaela's law, which came about that would have held parents responsible if a child got hold of a gun and went and shot someone else, failed. It didn't make it through, and a lot of people were scratching their heads saying that sounded pretty reasonable to a lot of folks. Now, I heard after the fact, and I was looking into it, and I thought, well, now, couldn't they still, without that law, be held accountable for reckless endangerment, you know, if they leave a gun out that a child gets hold of and someone gets hurt, which I guess they technically could. But you were telling me, for whatever reason, that's not used, and that you think you need a more specific law?
Right. What we found, in actually speaking with prosecutors and district attorneys, is that you know, reckless endangerment, reckless homicide statutes are they're pretty they're kind of broad, and so when these types of incidents happen, where you have an adult that leaves a gun laying around and a child picks it up, there's you know, different prosecutors are not sure whether or not that actually meets the standard for reckless homicide or reckless endangerment. And so what we see is that sometimes charges are filed, but most often they're not. And you know, you can look across the entire state and you see certain instances where they are filed. Like, for example, this year, within a month of each other, there were two incidents, both involving 3-year-olds, or one involving a 3-year-old, one involving a 5-year-old. A 5-year-old was shot by a sibling. They found a gun in their mother's purse while they were sitting outside of a store.
We did a story on this.
And those parents were not charged with any crime.
But here's the thing about that, and I understand that. In that instance, as you said, horrible irresponsibility by the mother. But I guarantee you, after the fact happened, if any of these, and truth be told, a lot of parents are idiots and probably don't feel this way, but most parents are going to be devastated that happened. And it's kind of like, I understand the idea of maybe prosecuting, but you know what? One of their kids was just shot, or they shot and killed someone, and they're going to have to live on that. That's a devastating thing to any family. I just wish that a law like that, I don't see that law, if it were to pass, Michaela's, being a deterrent, unfortunately, because when this happens, it means the parents are out to lunch anyway, right? And they're not paying attention, they don't care. So, gosh, I just wish there was a better way to prevent it from happening instead of addressing the punishment after some kid shoots someone.
Well, a lot of that has to do with education and just making sure that people understand the proper way to store guns, and so that's why I always welcome an opportunity to discuss that. But, you know, actually, we do see that laws like that do serve as deterrents. States that do have better child access prevention laws do see fewer child-involved shootings.
Is there still, as we just have a couple minutes, I remember going into a lot of police departments, sheriff departments, right up front there's usually a box, and you can have it for free, gun locks.
Right.
And I have not seen as much of a push toward that in recent years. And I don't know, and I know some people say, well, if I've got a lock on it and I need to use it right off the bat, it's hard for me to get to it, and I guess I can understand that argument. But is that still something that's being advocated out there gun locks so children can't get to the trigger?
Well, we absolutely advocate for that.
Yeah.
And, you know, actually all new guns are sold with a gun lock. I mean, it comes for free.
Okay.
And, you know, if the concern is the time it would take to undo a gun lock, there are actually a lot of really amazing biometric safes that you can get that are not terribly expensive, that are right next to your bed, and you put your thumb on it, pops open, and you pull the gun out. It's actually takes less time to use a biometric safe that's next to your bed than it would to actually even pull open a nightstand drawer and pull the gun out.
So you're saying as opposed to a gun lock, which sometimes can go on the trigger or something. Because I got to say this, I don't know, if you're someone who's a gun owner and you have children in the house, that's perfectly fine. I understand that. But I can think of nothing more devastating than your child killing him or herself or someone else with your gun because it wasn't proper. Meaning that if you have a gun in your house, I would, you know, you just bend over backwards to make sure there is no conceivable way to, because you're going to live with that.
Yes.
Like this father, Tim Batts, is going to live with for the rest of whatever punishment I'm telling you he gets from the legal system is going to be nothing compared to what he's going to be living with the rest of his life.
Right.
He killed his own child.
Yes, it's horrible.
And I would think anyone rationally would say, you know, I'm going to try. And you'd be surprised how easy kids can get to things.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, what we see also is there have been a lot of studies on this. You know, parents think that their children don't know where the guns are in the house, and the children always know where the guns are.
They always figure it out.
And, you know, you think, oh, I'm going to tell my child not to touch a gun, and, you know, that they know what to do if they encounter a gun. But the reality is kids are kids, and you can't just tell them not to do something and expect them not to do something. So you absolutely tell children that and give them that education, but it's incumbent upon you, if you're going to have a gun in your home, you have to store it safely to prevent horrible accidents, and you have to be responsible with it as well.
We do more stories on that, and it breaks my heart every time. Beth, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
We will talk again, man.
Okay,
Take
fantastic.
a break. Programming note right after this, everyone.